Hi everyone and welcome back to Partners in Crime. My name is Poppy.
And I'm Roger.
This is a particularly heavy case today about a very tragic current case that happened earlier this year. So let's start. Lindsay and Patrick Clancy live in Duxbury, Massachusetts in the USA. Patrick, who is 34, works at Microsoft as a sales executive, and Lindsay, who is 32, works as a labour and delivery registered nurse. They got married in 2013 after a long relationship and have 3 children together. The first child is called Cora, who is 5. Second child is Dawson, who is 3. And their third child called Callan, who is 8 months. Unfortunately, it was when their third child was born that all their problems and the tragedy of today's case starts to unravel. So let's go back in time a bit. On the 26th of May, 2022, Callan Clancy was born. Lindsay had 2 healthy births previously to Callan, and whilst his birth went well in general, Lindsay started experiencing a lot of anxiety postpartum. She wrote on Facebook about these new feelings she was experiencing, but was going to try staying as healthy as possible, focusing on exercise, nutrition, and her mindset in order to hopefully get past this feeling. Due to her busy job as a labour and delivery nurse, she was starting to worry about returning to work and juggling 3 kids. But the anxiety kept growing, and she developed feelings of depression towards the end of September as she was nearing the end of her maternity leave. So she decided to go see a couple of psychiatrists and is diagnosed with generalised anxiety disorder, which is a long-term condition that causes you to feel anxious about multiple situations and issues, not just one specific thing, and you feel anxious most days. Symptoms include feeling on edge, fatigued, difficulty concentrating, and sleep disturbance. One psychiatrist prescribed her with sertraline, which is an antidepressant, and another psychiatrist prescribed multiple medications over a period of 4 months. These included trazodone, zolpidem, clonazepam, diazepam, fluoxetine, lamotrigine, lorazepam, mirtazapine, quetiapine, hydroxyzine, amitriptyline, and buspirone.
What a cocktail.
Yes,
That's
so
quite a lot of drugs.
A whole bucket load of medications.
Well, I'm also amazed that you can say all of those, but you question saying Clancy.
So these were for her anxiety, depression, and insomnia. The professionals indicated she would be able to sleep, she would be able to feel, and she would be able to emote once the medications kicked in. Also, I'm not sure what combinations she was on at any time, because she obviously wasn't on all of them at once because she would overdose. But she was never on more than 5 medications at once. Lindsay is described as a logical person who made meticulous diary entries about the difficulties she was having with each of the medications, and when she was having issues, the doctor would stop them or wean her off and try a new medication. She was clearly having difficulties with the combinations she was on and having to often evaluate and change them. But it seems like she was fairly on top of this with her constant note-taking and everything like that. But because they hadn't found the correct combination for her, I'm assuming she still wasn't feeling great weeks into taking these medications, still possibly feeling, somewhat anxious and depressed, as well as experiencing the side effects of these new medications she was taking, which can equally be intense. So she still isn't feeling great, and in December she was evaluated at the Women and Infants Hospital Centre for Women's Behavioural Health to explore whether something else was wrong with her mentally. She had just had a baby, so could it have been postpartum depression, for example. After evaluating her, they said she hasn't got PPD, postpartum depression, and is showing no signs of PPD whatsoever. So the medication combinations continued, looking for the right ones to help her. However, at the end of December, things took a turn for the worse. Lindsay admitted to her husband she was having suicidal thoughts and even thoughts of hurting her children, which must have been so hard to hear and even harder to admit as a mother. But thank God she did admit this, and she self-admits herself into the McLean Hospital in Belmont, Massachusetts, on January the 1st, 2023. And after 5 days, after speaking with professionals, she was released. Hospital officials said she was not a danger to herself or others upon discharge, so she could now go home. Obviously, 5 days isn't that long. Patrick knew this, so once she was settled at home again, he asked whether she was still having these suicidal thoughts and thoughts of hurting the children. But thank God she said she wasn't. Patrick and Lindsay even went for a dinner at their friend's house, something they both haven't been able to do for a few months. On Sunday the 22nd of January, they went to an old college friend of Patrick's house. His name is Kyle Kearney, and also his wife and kids were there as well. Patrick also brought their 2 older kids, Cora and Dawson, as their kids all get along and go to the same school. Kyle describes the evening as seeming fairly normal. He was actually surprised that Lindsay came to the dinner, as he was aware of how much she had been struggling recently, and they hadn't seen her in months. But things seemed to be fine and perfectly normal. Lindsay was fairly quiet and stayed mostly looking on her phone. But the evening went better than expected, as Patrick had confided in Kyle that he believed Lindsay had been possibly going through a benzodiazepine withdrawal and was having the worst side effects possible, and how the medication she was prescribed wasn't working. Lindsay also saw her family that same weekend as well, and everything seemed fine. In fact, one of her better weekends she'd had in a while. However, just 48 hours later, everyone's lives would change forever. Tuesday the 24th of January started off normally. In the morning, Cora had a pre-arranged doctor's appointment, so Lindsay took her to that, and Patrick was working in his home office in the basement. They returned home, and because it had snowed, Lindsay, Cora and Dawson all wanted to play in the snow, and Lindsay even sent some cute photos to her mum. Later in the afternoon, Lindsay messages Patrick asking whether he wanted to pick up a takeaway from a restaurant called 3V in Plymouth, which is about 13 minutes away from their house. She said she hadn't cooked and has had a long day. He said, yes, that's fine, and they discussed what they wanted to order, and then Lindsay rang up 3V and ordered it around 5 p.m. Lindsay remembered she needs some Pedialax, children's laxative. I'm assuming for Cora, as she had a doctor's appointment earlier that day. Yeah. She texts Patrick at 5:15 p.m. asking if he could pick up the medication from CVS in Kingston on his way to getting the takeaway. And he said, yep, that's fine, and leaves to run these errands. So to clarify timings, to get from home to CVS, then to 3V, then back to Summer Street in Duxbury, which is where they lived, it takes roughly about 30 minutes. Plus the waiting times, etc., while at the destinations. Around 5:33 p.m, Patrick arrives at CVS to collect the medication. He tried to call Lindsay to confirm the medication he needed to pick up. She didn't pick up, but called him back a minute later. Patrick described her demeanour on the phone as if she was in the middle of something. It seemed a bit rushed. But he got the information he needed and moved on to 3V. And collected the takeaway around 5:54 p.m. and then headed straight home. Patrick arrived home at 6:09 p.m, so less than an hour after he left. He arrived home at 6:09 p.m. to a very quiet house. In fact, that was the first thing he noticed. With 3 kids, home life is rarely ever quiet. But he couldn't find Lindsay or the kids anywhere. He's calling their names, but there isn't an answer. He looks around the house, goes up to their bedroom on the 2nd floor to see if they were hanging out in there and maybe they just hadn't heard, but the door was locked. He's starting to panic and he breaks down the door. First thing he sees is blood on the floor, a knife on the nightstand, and an open window. He rushes downstairs to the back garden and he sees his wife lying on the ground under the window. He immediately calls 911 at 6:11 p.m. He could clearly see she had cuts on her wrists and neck, which is where the blood must have come from, and obviously what the knife was used for. But the cuts had stopped bleeding by the time he was with her. Patrick speaks to the 911 operator to report Lindsay's attempted suicide. During the call, you could hear Lindsay saying, "I tried to kill myself and jumped out the window." They immediately send over officers and paramedics to their house. Patrick stays on the 911 call until the first responders get there. And you can hear him ask Lindsay, "Where are the kids?" She replies, "In the basement." Still staying on the phone, Patrick goes to look for the kids in the basement. He's calling out their names but hears nothing. Suddenly the operator hears Patrick screaming in agony. There in the basement, he sees Cora and Callan lying on the floor of the basement in the den, and Dawson on the floor in Patrick's home office. They're not moving, and he's desperately begging for them to breathe. Officers arrived to the house and heard Patrick wailing in the basement and went running down there, and he yells, "She killed the kids." Lindsay was transported to South Shore Hospital in Weymouth. Due to the 20-foot fall, she suffered from lacerations on her neck and several broken bones, mostly some ribs, and in her back several severe spinal fractures, including a spinal cord transection, which in fact has left her paralysed from the waist down. Cora, Dawson and Callan were rushed to Beth Israel Deaconess Hospital in Plymouth. At 7:28 p.m, sweet innocent Cora and Dawson are pronounced dead at the hospital. But somehow 8-month-old Callan is clinging on to life and is later transported by medical flight to Boston Children's Hospital. At the same time, a Massachusetts State Police trooper arrives at Beth Israel Hospital to speak with doctors who treated the children to understand medically what happened to them. The next day, on the 25th of January, an arrest warrant was issued for Lindsay for 2 counts of homicide and 3 counts of strangulation, plus 3 counts of assault and battery with a deadly weapon. Lindsay was still in hospital when the warrant was issued, so she wasn't taken to jail or anything. Officers on the case obtained a search warrant for the Clancy home and combed through all their belongings and electronics. Sadly, on Friday the 27th of January at 18 minutes past 11 in the morning, little Callan Clancy succumbed to his injuries and was pronounced dead at Boston Children's Hospital. It was revealed that whilst the hospital team managed to get Callan's heart started again, he didn't have any brain activity, which is why he then died a few days later. Because of Lindsay's past with mental health issues, and now that she has allegedly committed these horrific murders and tried to take her own life, her defense lawyer hired a psychologist called Dr. Paul Ziesel, because this could possibly go to trial, and her lawyers need to know what is going on with her now mentally. Lindsay was allowed to call her husband from Dr. Ziesel's phone on the 6th of February. They started talking about what happened that day. She tells Patrick that she heard voices and had a, quote, moment of psychosis, end quote, after he had left the house on the 24th of January. He asks her what voices she heard, and she replies that she heard a man's voice telling her to kill the kids and kill herself because it was her last chance. So is this moment of psychosis her saying she has, or she thinks she has, postpartum psychosis? A rare and usually misdiagnosed severe mental illness. I'll go into more detail of postpartum psychosis as a whole later on in the story. On the 7th of February was Lindsay's arraignment. So this is when details were shared publicly about what happened that day, and the defendant is asked whether to plead guilty or not guilty. Lindsay appeared remotely via video camera as she was still in hospital. At Plymouth Court, District Court Judge John Canavan was at the arraignment along with prosecutor, Assistant District Attorney Jennifer Sprague, and defence lawyer Kevin Reddington, who made their arguments from the initial evidence about the case and their assessments so far. The main point of argument was about Lindsay's mental health and the medication she was prescribed, and whether this was why she murdered her children, or whether she was lucid and aware of what she was doing and killed them on purpose for whatever reason. Defense lawyer Kevin believes his client did this horrible act due to her mental illness, possible psychosis, and was definitely not planned. Quote, "This is not a situation, Your Honour, that was planned by any means. She's suicidal. She has been unable to express any happiness or sadness or cry." End quote. And of course, we know about her mental health history and her self-admitting into a hospital just a month earlier because she was feeling suicidal and expressed feelings of wanting to harm the children. Kevin details how many medications she had been taking in the months leading up to the incident and described her as a zombie due to her being, in his opinion over medicated. I've read that she was taking 3 medications at the time of the killings, but I'm not 100% sure which ones they were. That hasn't been released yet. But all medications come with their own side effects, which we'll go into later as well. Kevin also asked the court to not enter an inhumane order that Lindsay be incarcerated, as he believes she really needs to stay in hospital to be further assessed. He plans to argue that Lindsay lacks any criminal responsibility due to her mental illness. Assistant District Attorney Jennifer Sprague believes Lindsay knew what she was doing and was receiving effective treatment for her mental illness, and therefore was sound of mind. Quote, "She planned these murders, gave herself the time and privacy needed to commit the murders, and then she strangled each child in the place where they should have felt the safest, at home with their mum." Jennifer went on to express how Lindsay created the situation by using Google Maps to figure out the timings of how long she would have in order to commit the terrible act. Jennifer argues that Lindsay knew exactly what she was doing before, during, and after. Quote, "On January 27th, using an erasable whiteboard, because she, Lindsay, was still temporarily intubated, one of the first questions that Lindsay Clancy asked was, 'Do I need an attorney?' She knew that she had murdered her children, and she had the clarity, focus, and mental acumen to focus on protecting her own rights and interests." End quote. Both sides called on expert testimony and had Lindsay's mental health evaluated. We've already discussed forensic psychologist Dr. Paul Ziesel's opinion. He suggests Lindsay was suffering from postpartum psychosis, or PPP. Plus, Lisa Cosgrove conceded that many doctors often give excessive amounts of medication to patients. Like she's said, that's normal. Whereas Dr. Nancy Byatt claimed that there's no evidence to suggest that using multiple medications increases the risk of tragic outcomes. Overall, a not guilty plea was made on behalf of Lindsay due to diminished responsibility because of her mental health and her alleged psychosis she experienced. She was held without bail, and a probable cause appointment is set for May 2023. So on May the 2nd, at the next arraignment, it was revealed that Lindsay's doctors have transferred her to Tewkesbury State Hospital, which is obviously state-run, and she'll be held there for the next 6 months under Section 18, a Massachusetts law concerning the hospitalization of inmates with mental illness, until the 10th of November. The judge decided she still needs more help with her mental illness and is considered to possibly be a danger to herself. Lindsay is due back to court for a case status hearing on July the 25th. Let's discuss postpartum psychosis in more detail before we move on to some of the evidence that was found. To be clear, this is all from information that I've researched. PPP is a very complex mental illness, and obviously I'm not a doctor and I'm not educated in this subject either, but I want Roger and you guys to know the facts of this mental illness so we can then relate it back to the case. So just forgive me if I'm not 100% accurate with what I'm saying. It varies from person to person. It's super complex. So postpartum psychosis is a condition that affects a person's reality. 1 in 7 women suffer from postpartum depression. It's very common, yet postpartum psychosis is only 1 in every 1,000 women, so it is considered rare. PPD has still got a massive stigma around it, even though it is so common. Not enough people talk about it. Women feel ashamed they went through it, and even less people talk about the severe dangers of psychosis. Some of the main symptoms of postpartum psychosis are feeling manic, low mood, anxiety, rapid changes of mood, severe confusion, being restless, agitated, insomnia, and racing thoughts. But the more serious symptoms are paranoia, losing your inhibitions, feeling as if you're in a dream world, delusions, and hallucinations. So symptoms can vary from person to person, like I said, and they can change rapidly from hour to hour and from one day to the next. But they can make it difficult to look after yourself and your baby when you're going through it. During a postpartum psychosis episode, it's very rare for you to be aware that you have the symptoms of this mental health condition, but your family or friends, people around you, will usually know that something is wrong. It is apparent that something's not right. Because they don't recognize their mental health condition, they may misunderstand attempts to help them as a sign that someone is trying to hurt them. So it is vital for friends and family to proceed with caution and to seek professional help. There is a much higher risk of the mother harming themselves and or their children when they have the psychosis. According to the Royal College of Psychiatrists, symptoms often begin within the first few days of giving birth, usually at least within 2 weeks. Less commonly, this illness can start later by several weeks after birth. So to clarify, Lindsay's anxieties that she first feeling, they became clear 4 months after giving birth. If someone is exhibiting symptoms of psychosis, it is considered a medical emergency and should be seen by a doctor immediately, as women usually need to be treated within a hospital environment. According to Cleveland Clinic, there are 3 subtypes of PPP: depressive, manic, and atypical or mixed. The depressive subtype is the most common and also the most dangerous. Quote, research shows that depressive symptoms and psychosis are almost always a factor in cases that involve self-harm or harm to a child, especially hallucinations or delusions that command a person to harm their child or themselves. The rate of harm to a child is about 4.5%. And the rate of suicide is about 5%. Symptoms include anxiety, delusions, hallucinations, loss of enjoyment of things they normally enjoy, feelings of guilt, thoughts of self-harm, suicide and or harming their child. I believe if Lindsay is proven to have psychosis, it would be this one, as the other 2 subtype symptoms don't add up with how Lindsay has been described. I'll still go into them. Manic subtype is described as talking more or faster than usual, needing less sleep, delusion of grandeur, aggressive, and atypical symptoms are disorientated, disorganized speech or behavior, hallucinations, and catatonia. Psychosis is treatable with a few methods that may work. However, because it is a rare condition that hasn't been researched thoroughly, means there is limited information as to how to treat this condition effectively. Treatment can be medication and or electroconvulsive therapy, which has proven to be very effective. With treatment, people can recover within a few weeks. Without treatment, PPP can last for weeks or even months. The condition becomes more severe and dangerous the longer it goes untreated. So that's a kind of general thing of psychosis there. So in relation to Lindsay and what we know so far, it appears she did have a couple of the symptoms of psychosis. She had the anxiety, the insomnia, the low mood, which is when she initially received the help 4 months after giving birth. Finally, all the articles noted how people with postpartum psychosis rarely are aware of their medical condition. And if confronted with concern of their condition, they could misconstrue that as a threat. So with Lindsay saying coherently to her husband Patrick on the phone that she had a moment of psychosis, would she have really been aware of this, or was she told this by the psychologist, Dr. Paul Ziesel? And if she was told by the doctor, would she have believed him? Another point I wanted to briefly discuss is the medication she was on. As these are mental health medications, they come with a lot of side effects, but they can subside or level out after a few weeks or months being on them. But in 4 months, she had tried all of these meds. I think it's a total of 13 medications, which just seems like a lot. The defence is suggesting that the side effects of some of the medications may have contributed to the murder of her children, or, contributed to her mental state, which then led to the murder of her children. So I've researched all of the medications she was on, as I'm not sure which ones she was taking at the time of the murders, just to see what the side effects are specifically to this case. So I've only made notes of the side effects that are relevant, as they all have many side effects, but they're not all relevant. So I'm not going to list them all, but here we go. We'll put it up on the screen because it's a lot of words. But you will notice some common, similarities. Fluoxetine, common side effects, anxiety. Uncommon, suicidal thoughts, hallucinations, abnormal behaviour. Quetiapine, common, suicidal behaviours. Zolpidem, less common, irritable, loss of interest, trouble sleeping. Rare, anxiety, rapidly changing moods, suicidal thoughts, delusions, paranoia. Diazepam, lorazepam and clonazepam. Common, anxiety and depression. Uncommon, hallucinations. Rare, aggression, delusions. Very rare, psychosis. Lamotrigine, less common, anxiety and depression. Mirtazapine, less common, mood changes, abnormal thinking, anxiety, feelings of not caring. Rare, anger and mood swings. Sertraline, less common or rare, aggressive and mood changes. Oh, so the next couple, they only have frequency not known side effects. So basically, there isn't enough reports on the side effects to kind of clarify whether they're common or like really rare. So I haven't really listed them because I didn't want to I couldn't judge what they were, and there was like 30 side effects, so I just didn't want to kind of throw them out there. So trazodone, hydroxyzine and amitriptyline, they were all under that section.
Okay.
But it doesn't mean that they don't have side effects. Buspirone, rare, is mental depression and trouble with sleeping. So clearly we can see some common traits between them all: anxiety, depression, hallucinations, and some even have the suicidal behaviours. So we don't know what she was taking at the time of the murders, so we can't go into too much detail about this, but I just thought it was important to share the side effects of all the medications that she was on. Patrick did confide in his friend saying she was having terrible side effects and even withdrawing from the benzodiazepines, which I believe are like the diazepams, lorazepams, clonazepams, the PAMs. I literally just listed that afterwards. Symptoms of withdrawal from benzodiazepines are the same as the others: anxiety, depression, sleep problems, delusions, paranoia, and hallucinations. So it's a whole cocktail of just mess, isn't it? So she's obviously got mental health problems. She's on all sorts of combinations of medications that have these side effects, and then she's also possibly withdrawing from medication that has these side effects. If benzodiazepines are suddenly stopped, this can cause serious withdrawal symptoms such as confusion and psychosis. So we knew she was going through a withdrawal, so this could have contributed negatively to her mental state as well. Once we hear her side of the story and find out what meds she was actually on, that would be really valuable information to have. So let's go over the limited evidence that we have been told in the media. Lindsay kept meticulous notes of her medication and a diary of how she was feeling. She made a note on her phone in October 2022, which read, "I think I sort of resent my other children because they prevent me from treating Cal like my first baby. And I know that's not fair to them. I know that. I was feeling so depressed last evening when Cora and Dawson came home from school. I know it runs off on them. So we had a pretty rough evening. I want to feel love and connection with all my kids." Patrick was seriously concerned about Lindsay and the medication she was on. He speaks to Lindsay's doctor in January, before the murders and after she was discharged from the hospital. He wanted help with managing her medications. He begged for help and described the medication as turning her into a zombie, and that the medications prescribed were over the top. But then a week later, she murders her own children, and he didn't receive any help. January the 23rd, the day before the murders, she makes a note on her phone saying that she has a touch of postpartum anxiety about returning to work. On the day of the murders, when Lindsay called CVS in regards to the medication Patrick ends up buying later that day, the manager she spoke to tells investigators that Lindsay did not slur her words or sound impaired during the phone call.
Right. Okay.
So I'm assuming she sounded lucid.
Yeah.
When Lindsay called Patrick from Dr. Ziesel's phone and said how she had a moment of psychosis and was hearing voices, he reveals to investigators that she had never mentioned hearing voices before or used the word psychosis with him before. And from what we have heard earlier, she was always pretty open about her feelings. And would often tell her husband what was going on, obviously, when she opened up about suicidal thoughts, etc. So he seemed surprised that he had never been told these things before. Newly unsealed court documents were revealed in an arraignment on the 26th of October 2023, so very recently. The documents include search warrants and affidavits that include a list of multiple items that were taken into evidence from the house, such as 3 cameras, a baby monitor, a journal, 4 laptops, a silver knife, and 4 medication bottles. Investigators also took blood and urine samples along with swabs from under Lindsay's fingernails. The affidavit states, quote, "Investigators are also aware that Ms. Clancy used her cellular telephone and her journal to document her mental state and her feelings about her children. In addition to keeping track of her medications and researching ways to kill," which means that it is reasonable to conclude that Miss Clancy would have used all formats and tools available to her, including a tablet. I don't know what that end bit means, but yes, that's right. She searched ways to kill. However, investigators did not go into detail of this discovery, on Lindsay's phone. Allegedly, 4 days before the murder, Lindsay searched on her phone, "Can you treat a sociopath?" So this has played into the prosecution's argument of how Lindsay had planned this all along and is faking the psychosis. Jennifer Sprague expresses how she believes the suicide attempt was fake. The cuts were superficial as they had already stopped bleeding by the time Patrick came home. And she lowered herself out of the window and dropped down. I don't think she took into account the fact that the ground was frozen. But the height of the window is around 20 foot. And after a quick Google, anything above 10 foot can cause spine injuries. So that is all of the evidence that has been released so far. The next hearing she has is on December 12th, I believe. Oh, and I read something about the court system in Massachusetts, which I found interesting. So in court in Massachusetts, if there is a serious mental health issue and a claim of lack of criminal responsibility is raised, it's the prosecution that has to prove that she was sane beyond a reasonable doubt. Whereas normally it's the other way around. The defence normally has to prove the innocence of the defendant.
Yeah, right.
So from that, I think the prosecution are going to have a very difficult time proving that, if I'm honest. So as the story has broken, multiple women and doctors have come forward in defence of Lindsay and her possible psychosis condition. Around 20 letters were sent to Lindsay's defence lawyer, Kevin, on their opinion, their personal opinion and also their professional opinion of the defendant and the condition. So Juliet Hollander, a nurse who worked with Lindsay for 8 years, wrote, "I can attest to Lindsay's true character and know that whatever happened that day was not the real Lindsay, whom we all love and cherish." And in response to what Lindsay is accused of, she wrote, "They were unthinkable acts, so far out of touch to what the truly lovable mother I knew would have committed." Another fellow nurse wrote, "I do not know a better mother than Lindsay Clancy. She lived and breathed for her children. I rarely heard her talk about anything else but them." A childhood friend from first grade, Michelle DeConto, said, "When Cora was born, her mummy nursing skills took over and she would check Cora's vitals at home just to make sure she was okay. She had a special bond with all her children and was so proud to be a mum." So there were so many nice words written about Lindsay from past patients as well, calling her a calming presence and the best nurse I've ever had, and just how devastated everyone is by this news. In regards to Patrick, the husband, a GoFundMe was created for him in which over $1 million has been raised to help him with the funeral funding. and just to help him get through the coming difficult months. It was,
Blimey.
I know, amazing. It was made clear that none of the GoFundMe money is going towards Lindsay's defence. That is being funded. That is being funded by Lindsay's parents, but will very soon run out. He stayed silent and out of the media for the first few days of the incident, of course. But he did release a statement on Saturday the 28th of January. I won't read the full thing as it is quite long, but I will read some of it because it's very sweet and also very, very sad. So here we go. A lot of people have said they can't imagine, and they're right. There's absolutely nothing that can prepare you. The shock and pain is excruciating and relentless. I'm constantly reminded of them, and with the little sleep I get, I dream about them on repeat. Any parent knows it's impossible to understand how much you will love your kids until you have them. The same goes for understanding the devastation of losing them. Cora, Dawson and Callan were the essence of my life, and I'm completely lost without them. My family was one of the best things that ever happened to me. I took so much pride in being Lindsay's husband and a dad to Cora, Dawson and Callan. I always reminded myself that each day with them was a new gift. Callan usually woke up first and would rest his head on my shoulder for a few minutes as he adjusted to the morning. Dawson typically sang or spoke his thoughts out loud for a while before we'd go get him. Cora was a big girl and would simply walk downstairs. I can still vividly picture her coming into the living room each morning with her hair in a mess, smile on her face. They gave me purpose and I never took it for granted. This is now a massive void where that purpose once was. Cora had an infectious laugh and was stunningly beautiful. She was the cautious one, but it was really because she was so caring. She used to say she wanted to be a doctor and a mama when she grew up, and she would practice by giving Callan checkups. She truly loved her brothers and us and said it often in her sweet voice. We did a lot of father-daughter activities together, like skiing and visiting San Francisco or just talking. I loved her, my firstborn, so much. Dawson had beautiful, bold brown eyes that beamed with friendship. He was naturally humorous and generous beyond the norm of a typical toddler, always willing to share his toys with others. For all the love he received, he always gave back more. His best quality was his pure kindness. He would hug me tighter than most adults, and every night he told me in consistent words at bedtime, without fail, "Good night, Dada, I love you." We had a special bond from day one. He was my buddy, my first boy, and truly a gift. Callan was our easygoing child. I always said it was because he was the third child. He had to adapt, and he did easily. He was born with hardly any fuss and was by far our best sleeper. He was just an incredibly happy and vibrant baby, constantly smiling. Our nickname for him was Happy Callan. The last moment we had together was our routine. I would come up from my office at the end of the day and swing him between my legs while he laughed and smiled. If I was ever having a bad day, Callan always knew how to heal me. Perhaps that's why he held on a little longer, to spare me whatever pain he could. I want to share some thoughts about Lindsay. Our marriage was wonderful and diametrically grew stronger as her condition rapidly worsened. I took as much pride in being her husband as I did in being a father and felt persistently lucky to have her in my life. She loved being a nurse, but nothing matched her intense love for our kids and dedication to being a mother. It was all she ever wanted. Her passion taught me how to be a better father. I want to ask all of you that you find it deep within yourselves to forgive Lindsay, as I have. The real Lindsay was generously loving and caring towards everyone. Me, our kids, family, friends, and her patients. The very fibres of her soul are loving. All I wish for her now is that she can somehow find peace. We'll find out more and more as we go, because she is getting better and assessed. She's getting help. She will hopefully stand trial. I mean, she will, not guilty. They won't hold trial until she is able to stand trial. But obviously there's another hearing on the 10th of December, so no doubt we'll get more information then on the case, so I'll be keeping my beady eye on that. We'll obviously be doing another video on any updates when they come out. Okay. Well, thanks for listening. Hope, you've at least learned something from this horrible episode. And just remember to like and subscribe. Okay, bye guys.